Should we get her up to 20 knots and see how she feels?
Absolutely.
Does that actually happen?
Right, no. Essentially, it's a £100,000 box to tick.
Yeah. We're lucky enough to test lots of new boats here at YachtBuyer, but what we unfortunately don't get to learn about is what these things are like to live with. Well, today, hopefully we're going to get an insight into that, because we're here to meet a chap called Henry, who earlier this year took delivery of this Princess F55. And today we're going to take it for a spin, he's going to show us around, and we're hopefully going to learn a bit more about what it's like to buy, own, run, and live with one of these boats. Let's get going. I'm Jack Haines, and this is YachtBuyer. Henry, thank you very much for having us on board Mango. We're going to have a tour of the boat and hopefully have a quick spin later. But before that, it would be really good just to get an idea of your boating history, the boats you've owned previously, what else you considered before you landed on the F55, and what specifically it was about this boat that you like so much.
In terms of ownership history, so started off little Four Winds 195 inboard V8. We used water skiing in lakes and then some coastal work. First sort of proper boat, Fairline Targa 35, 1995, I think CAD 42 engines. Moved from there to a Flybridge. The sports boats are a pretty boat, but I didn't like all the bits of tent pole and stuff that went with it. So went to a Phantom 42, 63p engines. Fairline. Yeah, that was a 97, I think, that boat. Yeah. When we were looking to change that, we looked at the Fairline 43. It almost felt a bit smaller than the 42. So we then looked at the Princess and the Princess P42, got a 2007 P42 with Volvo D6s in it. Yeah. Fantastic boat. I mean, at that size, you know, did everything really, really well. Having had boats a while, I fancied looking at the charter business. Right. So we looked at bigger boats, and then we got a Princess 50 Mark III, so the first of the full beam.
That's a 50 Flybridge.
Yeah, first the full beam owners cabins. So we had that. We bought that in 2012, and that was a really, really good boat. Yeah. Full beam owners cabin, a lot bigger than the P42, and we could operate that as a charter boat quite well. Yeah. And so we ended up keeping the 50 for kind of 10, 11 years, so a lot longer than we thought. Yeah. In 2017, 2018, we ended up at one of the boat shows and we saw the F55 for the first time. Yeah. And that was the first boat that we went on that we suddenly thought, right, you know when you go on something and it just sort of ticks all the boxes. It was bigger in every respect, and immediately we thought then, you know, this might work as a boat. Yeah. And so ended up placing an order for this in September at the Southampton Boat Show 2021. Okay.
And what else were you looking at in this sector apart from the F55, if anything?
We looked at a lot. Yeah. I mean, in the UK boats, obviously Fairline and Sunseeker are the big boys. Yeah. Fairline, volumetrically they were too small inside, so that it didn't really work for us. Sunseeker, I think, had been the same, but with the advent of the Manhattan 55, suddenly that I think competes with the Princesses in terms of internal volume. We looked seriously at that. We had big discussions with their sales team, which is they've got a pretty strong sales team, so we were looking at those as well. Ultimately, I didn't feel it was quite as practical a boat as we were looking for. Styling wise, I think the Sunseeker is probably more Lamborghini than Porsche, and we're probably, more Porsche. We're not a bit gregarious. Right. One of the closest boats I think Cannes, we saw a manufacturer, Serena, Turkish company. Yes. Yeah. And they had a 56, 58, I think 58 it might have been, which is volumetrically, again, it's a sort of trawler style boat, modern trawler style. Yeah. A lot of space inside, massive flybridge. Yeah. The problem is, I don't think it quite had the build quality that Princess has.
Well, we'll start at the back, shall we? Because absolutely. I know that this is the first for you having the hydraulic bathing platform.
Yes.
Which technically is an option. You sort of have to have it.
Technically, I think, yeah, I don't know of any boats that have ever been produced ever without them, but technically you pay extra on the checklist for it, yes. Yeah. I liked a fixed bathing platform with a passerelle crane to launch and recover a dinghy.
Right.
I haven't started using this in anger yet, so I'm sure once you get used to it, it's lovely. Certainly from an actual bathing perspective, it's nice. If charter guests want to go swimming, we can lower the platform in, makes transition in and out of the water really, really easy. And other people seem to manage to launch and recover okay, so we'll do the same.
I think most of these boats probably carry a Williams of some description, but you're not going down that avenue.
No, we're looking at it's a very lightweight carbon fibre or GRP carbon fibre boat, a rigid boat. It's like 45 kilos worth of boat, little 15 horse engine, but it's still a 3.3 metre boat. But great for kind of going ashore. So we use a tender as just a kind of tool to get from an anchored boat to go ashore, to go into town, to go to up a beach or whatever. So I want to be able to drag it up the beach. I'm not bothered about dragging water toys around and that sort of thing, so I don't need 50 knots. It's a really practical thing, and also if I'm leaving it tied up in a little tender park, I'd rather have a more modest amount of money tied up there rather than 40 grand's worth of tender.
You say it's AMT is the brand?
So it's AST is the German company.
And then the option on this boat, you can either have storage back here or a crew cabin.
So we had on the 50, we had a crew cabin. Never once slept in it. It's this size of boat, you only get a single berth, which if we're using it for actual crew, we need 2 people. So we would have to use our third cabin as our crew cabin.
So just point out at this point that when you run the charter, that is you and your partner Sharon, you're running it. There's no sort of captain on board, no other.
No. So I'm the captain. And so it helps. I'm sleeping with the hostess, but don't tell my wife, who's also my hostess. So don't judge me too harshly. But so we would, if it was an overnight charter, we would share the third cabin. I have to say 99% of our charters are day charters. But I think there was a lot of people will specify a crew cabin, and it's a £20,000, £25,000 option to do, and yet never actually use it. So I just thought, look, if we haven't got all the clutter of bathrooms and toilets, and you get much more storage. And so for us, actually, that gives us a really big storage area, which we can use for all the stuff that and we've kind of got all the gubbins plus our coding gubbins. Seating here is really great, particularly when used with the galley aft, and obviously this folds up, so Sharon can kind of manage the lower area in terms of serving guests from here, keeping eyes on down below. I'm upstairs at the helm position, and I've got eyes on up there, but you can get sort of 5-6 people sat really comfortably around the table, and then you've got your space inside as well.
And I guess the area that guests would tend to gravitate to is probably up there.
It is the Flybridge,
so have a look?
Absolutely.
Up here on the Flybridge, I imagine this is a space where you really feel the difference over your previous boat.
Absolutely. So on the 50, you probably got 6 or 8 people on the Flybridge, and you felt that the weight on the top and just the space. We had a kind of aft bathing area here, some beds here. This is absolutely spectacular. It's really weird, but from a personal level, I buy the Flybridge not for the Flybridge, but for the cockpit. Because I like the fact that you can put your cover around the cockpit and make it fully enclosed, or you can have it open, and also when you anchor, it's always downwind. And so for me, actually, a Flybridge boat is for that. However, from a charter perspective, this is unbelievable. We've kind of got the Flybridge of a 65 foot boat, comfortably. We get 12 people up here, to the point where I actually give my safety briefing up here. And people do like to be sat up here. We've got a Bimini, which if we need to, we can electronically fold away. One of the things I sort of wrestled with a bit when we were speccing the boat was the power operation of the Bimini.
Yes. So standard is a manual Bimini.
Well, no. Sorry.
Nothing.
Yes, if you spec the Bimini,
Yeah.
it's a manual Bimini,
Yeah.
and that's what we had on the 50.
Yeah.
The power operation of it is a kind of £10,000 box to tick.
Yeah.
And I thought we don't need it. It's spectacular. Again, it's so easy. It's a massive thing.
Yeah.
And even on the small 50 Bimini, you kind of wrestle with it a bit. With this, you just unclip your wires and your rods,
Yeah.
and then it folds over.
Collapses
It's lovely.
back.
It goes forwards,
Yeah,
this
it
on
goes
this one, yeah.
around the windscreen.
Yeah. But the reality is, of course, if you want to go sunbathing, you go on the bow.
Yes.
Because on this you've got the step through bow seating,
Yeah.
and then the sun bathing area on the front there.
Yeah.
This was again one of those areas that you just look at and think,
Yeah.
works really well.
And I think one thing we should talk about before we head downstairs, because I think we're feeling the effects of it up here,
Yeah.
is that you spec'd a Seakeeper.
Yeah.
And the first time you've had a stabiliser,
Yeah.
I believe, and,
Yeah.
and a big call, because they are not cheap options.
It's essentially it's £100,000 box to tick.
Yeah. That's a jittery thing.
It's some things like a bit of extra anchor chain. You can just do that and not even think about
Yeah,
it.
yeah.
But it's the size of a small house in some parts of the UK.
Yeah, that's,
Having done it, absolute game changer.
Right.
And I think with my kind of mean man maths head on, I think you will get all your money back on a Seakeeper.
Right.
To the point where I think if you wanted to sell a boat of this size without a Seakeeper, I think people would probably penalise you the cost of a Seakeeper.
Right. Or overlook it.
Yeah. Or they simply wouldn't buy it at all.
Yeah.
We've got a Seakeeper 9 on this.
Yeah.
Some of the boats at this size use a Seakeeper 6.
Right.
And it is an absolute game changer. Both when you're at anchor, it takes the roll out.
Yeah.
Obviously, you can't take the pitch out.
Yeah.
When you are going along at displacement, and we do quite a lot of displacement work. So if we're relocating from our home berth to another berth to do a charter from, we tend to, the Solent's easy to judge the tide on.
Yeah.
So we'll take a tide and do it with using no fuel.
Yeah.
But then even with guests on board, they can't, drink lager as quickly as I can burn diesel on the plane. So and it's just nice, they can have a chat. The wind isn't howling away,
Yeah.
and just chat, have a drink, and as you quietly slip down the Solent.
Yeah.
So we do a lot of displacement work. So I think when a lot of people discuss stabilisation, they're talking of absolute extremes.
Yeah.
And I think for the kind of 50th percentile, for us, the gyro stabilisation worked really well.
Fascinating. Well, that's great. I think we should carry on the tour and head downstairs.
No problem.
Into the saloon then, and you said that the P50 you had that galley down layout. So we have the ubiquitous aft galley layout.
Absolutely.
That everyone's going for
Yeah.
now. How are you finding that?
Really like it.
Right.
I must be honest, I'd been one of those people that, galley down, you find all the reasons that galley down works.
Which were?
So, well, the fact that you can have a cup of coffee in your underpants. I now have to come up with these big windows. You
It's
imagine.
the thing we don't think about when we're testing boats.
I'm a good-looking guy, so I get away with it. But so you'd sort of say, "I'll grab a cup of coffee in the morning." The biggest thing was that the fact that with a galley down, you get full-size fridge freezer because you're not kind of precious about window space. As soon as you bring the galley up, all the manufacturers, they want big windows, so they're trying to protect their windows but have the galley up.
Yeah.
And so, as I say, with Princess, the 52 and the 56, they were really limited refrigeration. But with this, they've integrated a full-size fridge freezer.
Yeah.
And it's the one step down. The reason why they put a little step down is because it allows you to get the full-size fridge freezer under the stairs.
Yeah.
But the nice thing is it means that we can service the cockpit, the Flybridge, and if you want to, the internal dining room table.
Yeah.
And so you can do them all.
Yeah.
So really big fan.
Yeah.
And also, I when you're at a boat show, you're probably not aware of how much storage there is, and there's a lot of storage.
Right.
So with a combination of this area and then the sideboard opposite,
Yeah.
A couple of things we didn't specify, so we didn't put a dishwasher in because it takes up, I think, valuable real estate.
Yeah.
The other thing we don't have is a washer dryer because same reason, or two reasons there. I worry that whenever it breaks, as it will do, it's a nightmare to replace it.
Yeah.
And also I know from home where if it's a washer dryer, it puts that really humid air out and it makes your whole boat steamy and horrible.
Yeah.
So we wouldn't do it. I was worried that on the 50 we had two separate seating areas. So we had the lower saloon and then the upper dining area.
Right.
On this we've only got one space.
Yeah.
So I hadn't probably appreciated how big each space is.
Yeah.
I can lay out on here and Sharon can sit and lay here.
Yeah.
You could lay, we could all lay together. Be lovely.
Maybe later.
So actually, in terms of seating capacity, we've got more capacity in this one area than we had in the two separate areas. So that was a worry that was unfounded.
And you don't half feel the benefit of these windows when you're sitting here.
It's lovely. It's nice. I mean, we keep the kind of blinds down because to keep the shade in, but you can pull them up. And you know, if we're in a really scenic area, you get full visual. And then again, loads of storage under the seating there. You've got storage and stuff. This kind of raises and lowers. It slides in and out, and obviously opens up. So if you're eating or on a computer, you know, I think that what you need to eat, you also need for a computer table. And I think in this modern day, you know, we find ourselves more sat on a laptop or an iPad, doing a bit of work, you know, whilst on here, than necessarily eating as a family. But being able to change it around. Behind you is a big telly, big 50-inch telly.
Pops up from here.
Also a lot of the stuff, I hadn't appreciated accent lighting. I hadn't appreciated things like the telly. You know, we've gone from a small telly to this massive thing that you actually use the boat almost as a hotel rather than just as a boat. It's really nice.
We're talking of that. Should we go and have a look at the lower deck and the
Absolutely,
cabins? Well, I imagine this is another area where you feel the size difference over the previous boat. I know you said that was the first amidships.
So the Mark, the P50 Mark III was the first full beam. But this is where the magic happens, as they say on MTV. It feels, you know, volumetrically massive. And combined with, bizarre thing, the mattresses. The first night we spent on board, I hadn't appreciated the vice spring. I had to look them up, and apparently they were on the Titanic, whether that's good or bad. But really, really comfortable mattress. And
something I suppose you don't appreciate until you get it.
You don't,
can't
because
really test that.
They specifically say don't lie on the bed, and so you can't. Your bed you're not allowed to lie on. The toilet you're not allowed to use. So when you're in Boat Dusseldorf, don't use the toilet. They don't let you use the toilet. So really, it was like being in a hotel room with a mattress, and then going into the bathroom, and you know, the fine porcelain bowl and the fittings, and it just felt such a lovely experience. And I didn't realise it was going to be like that. I thought it would be more like the 50, but obviously as they've evolved and so on, you know, the windows, we had sort of 3 windows in the 50, and you know, they gave you a good look out. But you know,
the way they're using glass, is just
it's huge. And then this area, Sharon insisted we had to have the coffee table.
Well, this is what I say in every review. Owner comes down, I get away from it all, have a coffee. Does that actually happen?
Right, no. Because by the time I've gone up and made a coffee, I might as well just sit up there and have a coffee. What we actually use it for is as a study. That you will sit here again with a laptop, iPad. You know, the modern world is that whilst we're here, we're at work, and we've got to do accounting, finances, do emails, keep in touch. And this is a really, really lovely spot to sit with either 2 people or 1 person. You know, you will probably have a cup of coffee on your computer with a view.
So if you're on here for a week, say just you two, you have enough space for all your clothes.
Absolutely.
You're not having to go between cabins to stow stuff. And,
no, clothes-wise not. And it does mean then that other guests, if they were staying, can have. So sometimes we'll have sort of Emily in the Ford VIP as our third hostess.
Right.
Because I think I mentioned we coded for 12 plus 3, so 12 guests
Right.
and 3 crew,
Okay.
so that we can either run 2 hostesses ourselves,
Yeah.
or if we're working subcontract for an events company,
Yeah.
they can put their hostess on board.
Right.
We can have Sharon as crew
Yeah,
hostess,
yeah, yeah.
and myself as skipper. So,
Yeah.
you know, it works to
Yeah.
do that. So, you know, if she's in there, she can keep all the clobber in there and stuff.
Cool. Well, I think that covers it for accommodation. Should we go and have a look at the engine room?
Absolutely, yeah.
Engine room access here. Then in the cockpit, lift up this hatch, and again, we've said it before, but this, you said, is another space that does feel bigger than the previous boat, and
Yeah.
possibly a bit easier to move
Yeah,
around
so on the 50, you kind of walk down a ladder straight into the engine space.
Yeah.
Here you've got a sort of lazarette type area that leads through into the engine,
Yeah.
where the
And
engines
this
are.
is where the Seakeeper is on.
So
if you have it
Seakeeper
fitted.
sits underneath there, underneath the checker plate,
Yeah.
and then the air conditioning compressors are all kind of stacked up in the same place there,
Yeah.
all together to there.
Yeah.
Engine, your batteries are there. So it's pretty easy to
Yeah.
kind of walk around and do your daily checks.
Yes.
Location of raw water strainers and stuff
Yeah.
are easier on this than the 50.
Right.
Your cut-offs were slightly awkward to get at.
Yes, okay.
So yeah, I think it's just, and I think they're always trying to put a lot of gear onto a boat of a
Spaces
given
get
size.
bigger, but there's more kit to put in,
Yeah,
isn't
there's
there?
more
Yeah.
kit to put. So, you know, I
Yeah.
think real estate is always at a premium. But yeah, pretty pleased with it in terms of sort of layout. Yeah, you know, pretty straightforward.
What's your sort of routine, sort of pre-departure checklist for checking the engine room? What type of
Well,
things are you going over?
pray. So we're looking at, obviously, you know, levels, strainers. A lot of it with a new boat is actually quite easy because it's all clean.
Yeah.
You know, if you've got a leak, it'll show itself really quickly. So it's a Volvo D13 900 engines,
Yeah.
900 horsepower. I think I'm right in saying 3,000 newton meters of torque each,
Sounds
which
about
is the
right.
impressive one.
Yeah, it
But
is.
yeah, and
Yeah.
they're good engines. We had Cats on the 50.
Yeah.
You have to have Volvos on this
Yeah.
because it's what they build.
Yeah.
You know, there's a bit of getting used to them, but
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
it's a big boat. They drive it along all right.
Yeah, I
So
look forward to seeing what that's like. Should we fire her up and see what she can do?
certainly can.
Well, I get the impression that you try to drive up here as much as you can, even though you've got that lovely lower helm downstairs. This is where you'd prefer to be.
Yeah, I think the Solent can be a really busy place. I mean, today is a really quiet day, but you can imagine certainly the weekend, a lot of sailing boats out, commercial boats, motor boats. So it just gives me really good visibility. If I've got charter guests on board, there's not the distraction of them being down below with them. So yeah, and you know, it's kind of, you're in the open air. I kind of quite like it. It's
Yeah.
quite pleasant.
And you tend to cruise, I mean, generally, I suppose it depends whether you've got charter guests or not, but where do you like to cruise? What cruising speed do you tend to find yourself at most regularly?
So if we do a lot of displacement,
Right.
you know, as I said earlier, the Solent's really predictable in terms of tides. You
Yeah.
know, if we were heading the other way now, we got 3.5 knots of tide. So if I do 7 knots on the keel, we got 10 knots anyway
Yeah.
for literally zero fuel burn. If we're on the plane, we're probably, you know, in and around 20 knots, that sort of, you know,
Right.
but probably 18 to 22 knots, dependent on,
Yeah.
you know, conditions
Yeah.
and what the boat's doing. I judge it more on kind of fuel burn, really.
Yeah.
So, you know, I'm probably 225 litres an hour,
Okay.
and kind of whatever that gives me in terms of weight on board.
Yeah.
There's probably not a great deal of difference if we went up to 270
Yeah.
in terms of fuel per mile. It's probably about the same.
Yeah,
so,
sure.
so yeah.
Well, should we get her up to 20 knots and see
Yeah,
how she feels?
absolutely. So that's kind of 20 knots, 21 knots
Yeah.
on the water.
Yes.
And yeah, you know, it's a fairly even run up on. There's no noticeable difference between displacement and the plane. It just kind of
no.
goes on the plane quite
It's
nicely.
interesting because when I tested this boat, I sort of naturally fell at 25, 26
Yeah,
knots.
yeah.
that's where I feel like that's where it feels most comfortable. But actually, it's interesting. You find that this speed really is where you tend to live a bit more once you're on the plane.
Because I'm paying for the fuel.
Yeah, there is that.
The reality is, it's probably about the same in terms of fuel per mile.
Yeah.
You know, I just find that at 25, 26 knots, you know, if there's a bit of movement in the water, I'm really conscious of keeping charter guests comfortable. Maybe.
It does feel very planted, doesn't it?
It's very planted.
It's not very rough today, but
no, but
there's a sort of solid feeling through the water.
Absolutely, yeah, and I guess it's kind of that I'm looking for, really.
Yeah, and do you tend to hand steer in the Saloon, or do you use AutoPilot?
A bit of both.
Yeah.
So what I do tend to do is sometimes I'll just put it on, you know, engage AutoPilot, and then what you can do on this, which is a bit unusual, is you can actually manually steer and brake the AutoPilot,
right.
And then when you stop, it re-engages itself. So you haven't got to press buttons all the time. But what I sometimes do as well is just do a quick route to somewhere, just so I know what time I'm going to get there.
Yeah, of course.
If we've got to get somewhere by a certain time.
And is this how you generally have the screen set up? Chart, engines, and I see you've got the Seakeeper up over there.
I've got a Seakeeper, that might be Seakeeper, AutoPilot. If there's any risk of visibility, I'll have that as radar and a radar overlay. The engines, you know, I need to know kind of less, and that's a kind of speed and depth gauge on there as well. So,
and you find yourself comfortable at this helm, enough leg room and everything?
Yeah, really nice. I can move the seat fore and aft. And it's a really comfy seat. So
cool. Well, that's great. I think maybe if we head back in towards the marina, we can talk a bit more about slow speed controllability and how you found that.
No problem.
So we're nearly back into Portsmouth, and I thought it'd be worth talking about how you're finding slow speed manoeuvring, because there are some bits of kit on this boat that are first for you. You've got your variable speed thrusters, and the joystick as well. Yeah.
So joystick. I must be honest, I didn't actually spec, and the boats have arrived with it.
Right.
The joystick, I've used it a couple of times. On this boat, it's a shaft-driven boat rather than IPS, but the rudders are kind of electric servo motors, so they can turn independently, and then you do have the variable speed thrusters, and it kind of works using all those things. It's probably not for me.
Right.
It's a little bit aggressive. I prefer to just use the controls, you know, a little input of control, see what the boat's doing, and just, you know, the joystick, for me it's too aggressive. I wouldn't want one.
So you're using the throttles and the
just throttles, and the thrusters. The variable speed thrusters, absolute game changer.
Right.
First I've had them, and just delightful.
What is it you like so much about
the fact that you can be really subtle with an input, and it makes you look like a hero. You know, you can just tease the nose a little bit, or the stern, and then once we're alongside, I can just press the button, and it just gives me a little bit of thrust just holding the boat in, so it's easy for Sharon doing the ropes. But you know, rather than again having to have that loud sort of you know, full force of thruster.
Where they're either on or off. You can feed in the power.
You
For
can
those who aren't
just
aware, you can feed in the power a bit more gently and incrementally as well.
And it does make a very big difference. It's really nice.
And it does have a hold function as well.
Yes, so
it
you
will
can
hold the boat.
It will hold the boat.
The pontoon.
And you can sort of hold it in various degrees of power. So yeah, it allows you to just hold it, as you say, against the pontoon.
And you'll tend to do the bulk of the manoeuvring from over here as well. You wouldn't want to be doing that down there.
No, I tend. The only time, if we're going to go starboard side too, so port side too, I can be here and I can see Sharon on the port side. One of the nice things about this is that the upper helm is on the port side, the lower helm's on the starboard side. So if I'm going to go starboard side too, sometimes I'll drop down onto the lower helm, and then that way I can see Sharon, and so I make sure she's not in difficulty or anything.
Yeah, cool. Well, we're nearly back in now, so we'll let you concentrate. But Henry, thank you very much for giving us so much time on board. It's been fascinating.
It's been lovely
having
you.
Boat. And we massively appreciate it. Hope you have a great season on board.
Many thanks.
I hope you enjoyed that video, something a little bit different for us, something we're hoping to do more of. I hope you liked it. Do give us some feedback in the comments below. And Mango is for charter, and I'll put a link to her website in the description below. If you'd like to watch my in-depth review of the Princess F55, you can watch it up here. And if you'd like to subscribe, then please click up here. Thanks for watching.